In this segment, we study morphological analysis, which is another systematic way to develop concepts for solutions for a design problem. So it's a way to organize possible solutions to subfunctions to a problem so it fits in well, morphological analysis does, with functional modeling. And it's built around creating a matrix called a morphological matrix in which the rows represent functions. So you choose the important or hard to solve functions in a design problem, and those become the rows in the matrix. And each cell is a solution to the function. So in each row there are a number of cells, and each cell is a solution to that. These are called solution principles, or sometimes they're called function carriers, but they're ways to solve that particular function. And sometimes we can organize the columns. It may make sense to organize them according to some principles such as energy domain. And I'll show you some examples of that later on in the segment. But the idea is that once you've got multiple solutions to each function, then you can combine those solution principles or function carriers that are compatible with each other and combine them into an overall problem solution. So here's an example. This is a morphological matrix for a fingernail clipper. And you can see there's 5 functions over here on the left: applying finger force, converting the force to a larger force or amplifying it, moving the file into place, stopping the motion, and then releasing the force. And the way that those functions are accomplished are shown in this second column here, with the idea of a conventional fingernail clipper in mind. And so we apply finger force rather, with this top shape, this top lever. And there's a pivot here that's the fulcrum that helps us convert force. We swing out the file. The blades themselves contact each other, and that stops the motion during the cutting action. And then the body of the fingernail clipper acts like a leaf spring, and it acts to release the force and return the blades to their open position. Now we can use this technique as a way to generate multiple solutions or multiple concepts for the problem by adding in or coming up with different ways to accomplish the different functions. So for instance, we can have a linkage instead of just a simple lever to amplify the force. The file can be on the arm instead of being a separate piece, for instance. And so if we can generate solutions to each of the functions, then we can combine them in different ways and come up with lots of different concepts for the problem. We can also organize them according to energy domain. So for instance, for the concept of releasing the force, we might have a hydraulic solution or pneumatic that uses a piston and cylinder, or we might have some way of releasing the force by activating a magnet somehow. And so these represent different energy domains besides the purely mechanical energy domains represented by the first 3 columns of solutions. Here's another example of just of solutions, or a morphological matrix for solutions to just one function, which is storing energy. And you can see that it's an illustration of how the columns might be used to organize the solutions, and again, in this case, by energy domain. And so these are all mechanical solutions, so flywheels, a raised mass, etc., spring. Hydraulic ways, such as a bladder. Electrical ways, such as a battery or a capacitor. And then thermal ways, such as a thermal mass. So that's a morphological matrix for just one function. Now, I want to take you through an example of using this, and it's the design of a bilge pump for use in pleasure boats that are moored at a marina. So the bilge is basically the bottom of the hull, and if it's it's a place where water collects. So water may enter the boat by rain, or it may be waves splashing over, or whatever. And so the bilge needs to be emptied periodically to keep the boat from sinking. And this is the design of a product that will harvest energy from the environment and use that to keep the bilge empty. So you can see on this black box that it's very nondescript. It's just the energy itself is input, just very generically. And then, of course, the important things, water and impurities that enter the device and then leave it, etc. And what you'll see is we'll actually use in this example, the morphological matrix will include different ways to capture energy that will be based on different types of environmental energy that can be harvested. So here's the function structure for this example. And so you can see this top chain up here deals with capturing and transforming and storing the energy. And then this chain right down here is the main one that does the energizing of the water, or pumping, if you will. And then there's supporting functions that filter the water to remove debris and also inhibit backflow. So here is a morphological matrix for this problem, and you can see the first function is capturing energy. And again, it's organized by energy domain. And so there are multiple ways to capture that energy. So multiple ways to capture wave energy. That's one type of energy that's available in the environment. Ways to capture wind energy. Ways to capture the motion of the water. There are electrical principles there, and miscellaneous principles such as solar panels, etc. And then there are ways to transform that energy into mechanical energy once it's captured. Different methods of lifting and transporting the water, ways to inhibit backflow, and then ways to filter the water or prevent debris, as it says there. So the idea is to take one solution principle for each function and then combine those into an overall solution to the problem. And that overall solution, we call that a concept variant. And what you do then is you make a more detailed sketch of the concept based on taking those functions, which were documented verbally in the morphological matrix, and making an actual sketch that shows the locations of subsystems and components, how things are connected, and when you develop these concept variants, it's just very similar to C-Sketch. You tend to add more detail in and add in supporting functions maybe that you haven't thought of in the morphological matrix. So here's some examples of various concept variants for the bilge pump problem. And this one, can you tell how it operates? So this one will operate by relative motion of the boat compared to the dock due to wave motion. And as it rocks back and forth, it will pull this piston back when it rocks back, and then when it rocks forward and releases the tension in the rope, the spring in the pump pushes the piston forward. And this pump acts like a pump called a lift pump. And so what happens is initially there's water behind the piston, and when the piston is pulled back, this water flows through to this side of the piston through this valve here, and then it can leave the pump body. And then when the tension is released and the piston moves back forward again, suction is created behind here that sucks water out of the bilge. Now what's not shown here that you need is also some kind of a suction valve too, or a check valve to inhibit backflow. So that's not shown on this concept. And here's an example of a supporting function that's added in. So this rope is here to limit the motion so that the boat doesn't rely on the pump to prevent overextending the pump and causing failure of the pump. So the rope is a safety that keeps the boat from rocking back too far. Here's a second concept, pretty straightforward, for capturing wind energy. So it's got a propeller. It's got a relatively complex set of bevel gears here that transform the rotational motion from a horizontal axis to a vertical axis, as well as provide rotation so that the propeller is always facing into the wind. Then down in the boat, the pump itself includes a crankshaft that converts the rotary motion into linear motion, and that drives a reciprocating pump, which, as you can see here, sucks water in through here, and you can see the suction valve there, and then it flows out through the discharge valve. Here's a third concept, and I've actually seen one of these. This one is based on having a float that rides on the surface of the water, so it rides up and down with the wave action. And the body of the pump here is relatively heavy, and so it doesn't move as much relative to the wave action. So you get relative motion between this float and piston, attached piston, in the body of the pump. And so this again is a lift pump, and so when it rises, water is sucked in behind it, and when it falls, the water is allowed to come through by way of these valves to this side. So it also looks kind of like a bicycle pump if you've ever taken one of those apart before. And you can see the ball valve down here that is the suction valve. And I had a student once who actually found one of these and brought it and showed it to me. And it's actually the actual one that he had was a lot skinnier, so it had a aspect ratio that looked like a bicycle pump. It was a long, relatively small diameter cylinder, but the pump, the float rather, was very large comparatively. But it was the same principle. The body of the pump was relatively heavy. It was a plastic coated metal. And then the way that it discharged the waters, there's actually just a small hole at the top that allowed it to discharge. So that's a little bit about morphological matrices and morphological analysis to develop concepts, and then combining the solution principles or function carriers into overall concepts that we call concept variants. And that's the end of our discussion of concept generation per se. In the next segment, I'll talk a little bit about concept selection.